Minister Collins, thanks for coming in this evening to take this question. It's in relation to, I suppose, dog breeding establishments. I'm looking for details in relation to the number of pups bred every year in the country, the numbers exported, and I've listed out in the question the various bits and pieces that I'm looking for. And I suppose the reason I raise it, Minister Collins, is, you know, I've dealt with an awful lot of animal rights groups and charities over the last number of years, and to be fair, some of the stuff that I've seen is quite frankly eye-opening. Some of the facts, statistics, images that I've viewed and seen firsthand are quite frankly appalling in certain circumstances. And I think we have a lot to do as a state, we have a lot to do as a government in terms of ensuring that we have dog breeding establishments that are compliant, that are regulated, and when there are issues, that the, I suppose, repercussions are felt for those that are offending and not in compliance. Minister, nearly 7,500 dogs entered Irish pounds last year, according to the Department of Rural and Community Development. The ISPCA estimate that the number of cats and dogs surrendered between January and November of last year were 49% and 44%. The Irish Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals also estimates that 30,000 pups are bred in this country every year in licensed establishments. Other estimates from animal welfare groups estimate that this figure could be anywhere from 70,000 to 80,000 pups per annum. Just to give you an example of how lucrative and big this industry is in Ireland, the UK has a population 15 times the size of Ireland's, and we still produce half the amount of pups that they do. So it just gives you the extent of the dog breeding that we have in this country. Much of it is done properly, and much of it is done correctly by responsible dog breeders, but unfortunately much of it also goes under the radar. Dogs.ie, for example, last year had 25,770 pups for sale in 2024. So one of the questions I have here, Minister, is annually we're told that the figure of registered pups bred in licensed establishments is typically 8,000. So how are there 25,500 pups for sale on dogs.ie, as I said, in 2024? And that's something that I think we need to reconcile and to correct. Some of the practices in the sector are very concerning. It's an industry that's estimated to be worth somewhere around 150 million euros per annum. And I think what we need to look at is legislation that will restrict the number of breeding bitches that we permit dog breeders to have. At present, you can have 6 breeding bitches. I think that needs to be revised down, just in terms of, you know, capacity in these establishments, and the animal welfare obviously is at the centre of that. We also need to tighten up on alleged tax avoidance by those breeders, particularly in non-registered or backyard breeding establishments. There's a clear case there for revenue, I think, to be looking at this. And also we need to tighten up on the issue of dog licensing itself and microchipping to ensure that there's compliance. I was actually in the Dail here a number of weeks ago where Dail TD, Deputy O'Callaghan, raised the issue of a recent court case where a person who was clearly in breach and found guilty of numerous animal welfare abuses was fined a measly €500. Anybody that knows anything about the industry knows that these pups are going for often 1,000, 2,000 euros, and when you have a system that doesn't disincentivise that type of behaviour, people will just continue to take their chances and continue to, as I said, operate under the radar. Just in my last bit there, I'll just reference one other thing. Barry Roach, an Irish Examiner journalist, recently had a story about a conviction down in Charleville. I might come to it in my supplementary. Thanks.
Minister.
Thanks, Chair. So I'd like to thank Deputy O'Sullivan for raising this matter in respect to dog breeding establishments and the number of exports internationally. The Minister for Agriculture and Food and Marine has asked me to take it on his behalf as he's unable to attend. So the Dog Breeding Establishments Act provides for a regulatory framework for the licensing, monitoring and inspection of dog breeding establishments by local authorities, and where a serious and immediate threat exists to public health or animal health and welfare for the closure of such establishments, local authorities are responsible for the enforcement of the Act. Section 9 of the Act states that each local authority shall cause to be established and maintained a register of dog breeding establishments situated in its functional area. Therefore, the legal responsibility to maintain a register of dog breeding establishments is a matter for the local authority. However, recommendation 11 of the report of the Working Group on Control of Dogs recommended that a centralised national database of dog breeding establishments should be created. In 2023, the Department of Rural and Community Development and the Gaeltacht reached out to the local authorities to collate their registers. The Dog Breeding Establishment National Register was then published on gov.ie. Data on the number of pups bred in the dog breeding establishments was not requested at the time. In March of 2025, information was requested from local authorities to update the register, including the number of female dogs in each dog breeding establishment, but the number of pups bred was not requested as part of these returns. The updated register will be published on gov.ie in the coming weeks once all returns have been collated based on the information that was provided by the local authorities. In relation to the number of dogs exported internationally, these are facilitated through commercial movements. Commercial movement of pets is defined where a pet or pets are either travelling unaccompanied or are travelling for the use of trading or for shows, sporting events, or where an owner has more than 5 pets travelling. All commercial movements of dogs require certification. The type of certification is dependent on whether the destination is to other EU countries or non-EU countries. The number of dogs exported commercially from Ireland in the past 5 years are as follows. In the year 2020, 8,993. 2021, 10,581, 2022, 7,089, in 2023, 9,440, in 2024, 8,768. Certification must be signed off by a veterinary inspector in the Regional Veterinary Office of the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. An exporter must contact their local regional veterinary office to have an inspection of the shipment of dogs completed prior to travel. The Regional Veterinary Office inspection includes relevant paperwork, vaccines, microchips, health certs, animal welfare and confirmation that the exporter is registered with the department. As part of the programme for government, where this government is addressing the disjointed approach to dog control issues and ensuring all legislation and policy in relation to the control of dogs, dog welfare and dog breeding establishments will rest with the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. So there is, as the Deputy knows, a mechanism by which transfers of functions happen when new governments take up office and when new departments are established. So policy and legislative responsibility for the Dog Breeding Establishments Act of 2020 is due to transfer to the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine imminently from the Department of Rural and Community Development and the Gaeltacht, and both departments are working closely together to ensure the smooth transfer of functions.
Dail O'Sullivan.
Thanks, Minister. Look, and I know it's not your department, and I suppose firstly, look, I appreciate the figures. A lot of them I would have been familiar with already over the various years, but the standout thing is, so in 2024, for example, 8,768 pups exported. The ISPCA, the DSPCA, both estimate that somewhere around 40 or 50,000 pups are exported. So by the looks of those figures, and I trust the people on the ground, charities, because they're ultimately the people, when we as public reps get a report of whether it's a horse, a dog, whatever, in jeopardy, they're the people dealing with it every day, because basically what the state does is just give them a few bob every year to sustain them, in the hope that just we're ticking the boxes, and that's essentially what we've done over the last few years. So I trust their figures more than I trust the department's figures. So when they tell me there's northwards of 40,000 pups going out every year, I trust them and not necessarily the figures that you've read out this evening. I suppose fundamentally, like you've rightly said, it's the responsibility of the local authority. I can only speak in the case of Cork. I think we have 3 dog wardens in the city at the moment. I think it's a bit better in the county, it's around 6. They're not tasked with enforcing the stuff that they're faced with. I was just off the phone to a journalist, as I was going to say earlier, Barry Roach, who did an article in the Examiner a couple of weeks back where somebody was found guilty in Charleville. And again, the crimes that are being committed, and I suppose the gain for these people in taking the chance, going under the radar, far outstrip the sanctions and I suppose the penalties that if they get caught that they're faced with. And lastly, look, I'm aware that the department is, all coming under the Department of Agriculture, like you said. I have a concern with that, because that's, like, I understand why they're doing it, because the vets are with the Department of Agriculture, but there's not enough vets. The vets themselves will tell you that there's not enough of them, and like, they don't even have powers to do unsanctioned visits or inspections of properties. And if I just lastly say, Minister, like myself and yourself are living in a part of the country where actually the most of this puppy farm culture is in North Cork, West Limerick, parts of Kerry, and the numbers that are being bred, frankly, are astounding. And as I said, it's an industry of over 120, 130 million. It needs to be regulated better, it needs to be tightened up, and ultimately we need to improve animal welfare standards. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thanks. I absolutely agree with the Deputy that more needs to be done in this area. The whole area of dog breeding is a huge industry at the moment, and the 2019 Act, I think, was a very progressive start, but I think we have to revisit it and probably update it. For my own part, I've always been a huge advocate of animal welfare, and I think we always have to try and strive to continue to do more to promote a better culture of animal welfare, whether it's dogs, horses, whatever, cats. And I think I want to acknowledge the animal welfare groups. There's hundreds of them around the country, as we know, and they do receive funding from the Department of Agriculture, but it's not enough, and they need more, and unfortunately they have to rely on their own fundraising mechanisms too much, and I think we need to try and resource them a little bit better. I want to give a particular shout out in Limerick to the Dail Sighthound Rescue Organisation, Dail Animal Rescue, Star Rescue and Limerick Animal Welfare. I have first-hand knowledge of the very fine work that they do. I just want to refer to the Act, the 2010 Act. I remember at the time, because it was here, the then Minister John Gormley brought in the Dog Breeding Establishments Bill, and the opposition at the time cynically used it as a ploy, a political tactic to try and wind up everybody involved in outdoor pursuits, whether they were gun clubs, hunting clubs, fishing clubs, that this was going to be the thin end of the wedge, and that the government had a kind of a covert agenda to try and shut down outdoor activities. It was a brilliant piece of legislation at the time, which needs updating now. It needs to be better resourced, but at the time it brought in a regulatory regime around puppy farms and breeding establishments, which were gone out of control. And the ironic thing about it was John Gormley brought it in 2010. There was an election in 2011. Parties swapped over, and the then Minister Phil Hogan, one of the first things he did was commence the legislation, when the opposition at the time were very cynical. And I remember actually, that was 2010, 2011. I remember the 2016 election, when I was canvassing for myself, going into a farmyard where a fellow met me, and he said, I had very strong, robust words with you back in 2010 in relation to the Dog Breeding Establishments Bill. You told me what it was about. I didn't agree with you, and I didn't believe you at the time, and I want to compliment you, because what you said was right. So a couple of years later, people saw the good that was there, and unfortunately a lot of groups were misled at the time, and I do think that legislation needs an updating, because 2010 is almost 15 years ago at this point in time. A lot of people do a lot of good work in relation to animal welfare.
Thank you, Minister, for that.